Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Ask the Pros Business, where we bring entrepreneurs, business owners, people that have done it before. They come on the show to share their journey and their story. In a way, to motivate and inspire us. And for guys that want to go into business as well, they come, they tell you their story in order for you to take a thing or two from their story. On this particular episode, guys, I've got Dave here. Dave is an ex-Naval guy. Think the second time I'm having a military guy on the show, but I know we guys in the military, they're always very determined and always structured. And Dave is big on leadership as well. It's got his own podcast going on as well, which is great, so connection was great, So Dave, on this show, we always start from the beginning, which means, telling us how you started, let us in about the backstory so we know how Dave started, So Dave, for you, how did this whole journey start for you?
Well, I probably need to, back in school, I grew up in Philadelphia, on the other side of the country, East Coast of the United States. And frankly, I had no clue what I wanted to do. You hear all these stories about people who were inspired at a young age and they knew what they were going to do. And I was just, like probably many of our listeners out there, I was going through the paces. School was easy. The public school system didn't require a lot. And so I didn't give a lot, but I had good grades. And so it was just sort of floating along, as I like to think of it, to do. It took me a while. And eventually I settled on engineering because I was good at math. I had no idea what an engineer did, but I was good at math. So next thing I know, I'm in a rigorous engineering program I wasn't really qualified for. Not intellectually, but from a discipline perspective. I just didn't know how to apply myself. And so let's just say freshman year of college was the best 3 years of my life. And so, I tell people at this point in my life, I think like I went down the wrong fork in the road. I got kicked out of school and started engaging in behaviors that I'm not proud of, but they make up who I am today. So I'm proud of what I did with those behaviors afterwards, the lessons learned. But certainly at the time, I could have ended up in a bad place. But I saw the light, as it were, and I like to tell people I was going down the fork in the road and I crossed over, that green grass between the left and the right fork and got onto the other fork and started heading in the right direction and eventually graduated from college. Nice. And so I wanted to be an astronaut. So even to this day, candidly, if they tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, we need a 60-year-old man who has no experience whatsoever to go into space to do experiments, to just sign me up. And I'll be there in a nanosecond.
Why do you want to be that though?
Growing up, I loved history. I still do to this day. And reading about the explorers, Balboa, Cortez, Lewis and Clark, and these people who struck out where they had no idea what was on the other side. They didn't know what it was going to look like. The story was unwritten. And that just caught my imagination. And frankly, we know the world. Now there's a lot of places unknown, like the bottom of the ocean. By the way, oceanography at one point was something I had considered for that very reason, and space. And I thought space was really cool. So, it still has my imagination today. We know so little about it that to go someplace that so few people have been and help expand man's knowledge, that's exciting.
So you thought about that, but now you now ended up being a naval officer, what led to that?
Well, it was wanting to be an astronaut. So a friend of mine in college let me know that there's no like career path where you could go do this, and you'll be an astronaut. But at that time, and I don't know if it's still true today, but at that time back in the early 80s, more astronauts came through naval aviation than any other single source. And so I thought, he told me this, and I thought, well, if that's the way to be an astronaut, I'm just going to go and fly for the Navy. And so I went down to the recruiters. I literally, picture this, I went into the recruiter's office, sat back, I'm in my motorcycle jacket, my boots, I rode my bike down there, put my feet up on his desk, put my hands behind my head, all cocky like any, 23 or 4-year-old, and go, I want to fly fighters. And he almost laughed. Well, you got to graduate college, son. So I'm graduating this year. I was a senior at Temple University at that time. And he said, what's your major? I said, mechanical engineering. He said, what's your, GPA? And I told him, and it was much better than those freshman 3 years, which was at a different school.
Yeah.
I had learned that life lesson. And so, his eyes sort of opened up a little bit, and he said, well, you got to take a test. I said, when? Next thing I know, I'm taking what they call the ADFAS, which is, the test where they check your aptitude. And after that, his attitude changed. He came out and he went, okay. And about 9 months later, I'm swearing into the military, officer candidate school in Pensacola, Florida. And my life took a completely different course than what I thought it was going to take, 3-4 years before that. And, got my commission, got transferred out to the West Coast, to Miramar, flew F-14s for 6 or 7 years. And that was that. And got out of the Navy in 1993 and started my first business.
Yeah, but whilst you're in the Navy, what was your how did you see things? Because I know being an outsider, now you're a military guy, what were the first things you came across and you were like, oh my God, this is so different, how am I going to cope in this environment? What were those challenges?
Yeah, great question. No one's ever actually asked me that before. The initial challenges, frankly, was just getting through officer candidate school, because you show up, and it was 10 o'clock at night. I remember it was a Saturday night. It was raining. First of all, I had never flown on an airplane on a jet before my flight down to Pensacola, although I was going down there to fly for the Navy. I always thought that was kind of, weird. And check into officer candidate school, and the first thing they do is yell and scream at you. So the candidate officers who are getting ready to be commissioned, so they're in their last week of training, are actually running the school. Now, they don't do the training. They have, commissioned officers who are doing the training, but they're running your class. And it's part of their initiation to becoming an officer in another week. And so they start yelling and screaming at you instructions, teaching you how to stand at attention, how to address people, all the sort of little protocols that are part of the military culture that you don't know. And it comes as quite a shock. And so, you're just trying to hold on and get through this. And then 2 or 3 days later, you meet your drill instructor. And of course, you can't do anything right because they haven't taught you anything. And in order to motivate you to do things right, they have you PT, physical training. So you're doing push-ups, sit-ups, hop and pops, all that stuff. And if one person in the group messes up, the entire group handles it, right? It's a whole class. So that whole one die, we all die, they used to say. That culture was probably a bit of a shock. We're responsible for each other. So that was eye-opening.
It's all about teamwork, isn't it?
It really is. It's about teamwork. It's about understanding that what we do affects other people, which is true in everything in life. And that probably has sit with me more than anything else, that we have the ability to positively or negatively affect somebody else. And it's either a direct effect or an indirect effect, but our actions don't just end with us. And that was, I think, the lesson learned there.
Nice. Well, getting into an airplane the first time, because I want to just, get I want to get the feeling of that, Dave, getting into that airplane the first time, what was your reaction like? What was going through your mind?
So the first time I flew in any sort of military aircraft was actually before Pensacola, because as part of the recruiting process, once you've been accepted, they had a T-34 trainer in Philadelphia, and one of the recruiters was a pilot. And so he would take aviation candidates up. And so I flew in the backseat of a T-34 over Philadelphia, and we're doing aerobatics. We're doing loops and rolls and all the sort of things you see, like watching movies, barnstormers do.
Yeah, Top Gun and stuff.
Yeah. And so first of all, you're not doing anything but sitting there as a passenger, which is the worst thing to do because your mind isn't occupied and all you see is the horizon dipping and turning and spinning until your stomach says enough. And so that was challenging. The real challenge with that, however, is that's now in your mind. And so we go down, the officer candidate school. I graduate, I get my commission, I go to flight training, I finish ground school because you do ground school first before you actually get an aircraft. Now you get in the first time and it's a training mission and you don't want to mess up because the ethos is, do everything perfect. That's the military ethos. Get it right, do it right, and especially amongst pilots, it's precision. And so you don't want to mess up. And you get in there and what your mind goes back to is that first flight experience where you got sick in the same model aircraft. And so you have to sort of deal with that. And so that was, I'd say stressful is the right word for that. But you, like everything else, you get used to it. And, at some point, putting on the gear is uncomfortable at first, and then you just put your flight gear on, and it's just like wearing clothes, any other pair of clothes. And you get in a cockpit is comfortable to you, and you know what you have to do. But that first, more than just the first time, you're just nervous. You're keyed up. It's like game day.
Absolutely, man. But all in all, Dave, what would you say is the best thing you took out of military? The best thing you're holding on to now that you took out of military?
I think the best thing that I got out of the military, and it's really hard to say the best, right? There's a lot of great things that are probably different times in your life or different scenarios that emerge as glad I had that lesson learned. But if I were to say one, it's that sense of mission and purpose and how important it is in life to have a purpose outside of yourself. And that translates into everything I do today, right? Because it's not about me, it's about you and the listeners and the people I meet on the streets. And if I can serve other people, that's fulfilling. And so many people look internally for fulfillment and it's not there. You'll never find it, right? It's about service to others. And the more you give, the more you receive. But you have to give selflessly so that you can receive the gifts as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. I'm really on that 100, man. I think we are here to serve, and to be of service to others as well, and in serving, you often get things back, like you said, you give to receive. It's not as if you position yourself to receive, but it just happens that the law is that's just the law. It's just the law of love everything. When you give, you get, you give, you get. For instance, I'm doing this show. I'm not getting anything out of it. No monetization, nothing. I'm doing it because I know that there are people out there that are struggling, that want to go into business, that are waiting to hear stories, testimonies, from others that have done it. So I'm doing this, and luckily for me, it's grown. It's kind of like it's kind of like a wildfire now. It's something you can't stop now. So for me, when you put yourself out there, as to service to others, positive things happen to you. 100, they definitely do happen to you.
Absolutely, and in fact, in my business coaching practice, because as part of what I do is one-on-one coaching with businesses, one of the things exercises I go through with my clients who are new with me is what is their purpose of their business? And usually the first thing people say is to make money, to be profitable, right? To put my kids through school, which is a little bit selfless, a little bit selfish. It's about them. And I said, now, think about this for a second. Nobody is going to use your service or buy your product because of what it does for you. Right? They buy your product or use your service because how it helps them. And so no business exists solely for its own benefit. It must benefit others. And in fact, the more you think about how it benefits others, the more value you have to others, frankly, the better you're going to do as a business. Right. It's just and it's intuitive. The counterintuitive part is you say, well, I'm doing this for others, not for me, but you'll benefit greatly, right? So it's sort of this where's my heart? But it's okay to make money. People mistake that as thinking, well, that means I shouldn't make money. No, you cannot serve others as a business if you're not making money, because you go out of business. So being profitable is a requisite to serve others, but it's not the reason you're in business.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. So let's go back to the military days. So after military, you left military. What was the next thing for you?
Well, I started my first business.
Okay.
To talk about serving others, my business partner, who was a pilot, we went through officer candidate school together and ended up in the same squadron in the fleet. So we both had a similar experience. Remember, this is 1990, early 1990s, and we got married. Both of us were from a different part of the country. And back then there was no internet, or the internet was so nascent. There was no World Wide Web.
Yeah.
And if you registered for, your wedding registry at a store in San Diego, let's say, Crate and Barrel, for example, in San Diego, in Mission Valley, it's only that store where that registry existed. So my family who lived on the East Coast, my practice wife's family that lived in Orange County, they couldn't access that registry. So we ended up with like 5 toasters. We only needed one, and missing things that we wanted, that we needed, that we didn't have because nobody knew we wanted it or needed it because they didn't see our registry. So we started a business called National Wedding Registry, where couples would call us on a toll-free number, not couples, the family would call us on toll-free numbers, and we'd ask them, what their budget is or what sort of things they were looking for. And then we'd review the list with them, and they'd make a selection, and they would place the order through us. We would get it to them or to the bride as they wanted to. That was end of 1993 when we started it. By the summer of 1994, the internet, the World Wide Web had been born, and the major stores had all created their wide area networks so that the database was centralized, and the problem we were solving got solved by others. But that was my first business.
So funny because you probably thought that you had a great idea, and all of a sudden that idea just it's just gone.
Yeah, the idea was my business partner Grant's. I remember we were on deployment. We were in over at Iraq and Saudi Arabia at the time when he came up with the idea. It was his idea. I was more I handled the execution side of it. He was the sort of big vision guy, and I was more tactical. But I thought it was a great idea because I had the same problem he did. And yeah, we thought we were going to light the world on fire. I remember thinking I was going to end up with this big mahogany desk on the 20th story of this high-rise with, didn't happen.
So that was your first business. So what was, moving on from that, what was your second business then?
Well, so from there, one of the things I had to do was I learned about telecommunications because we needed a call center. I had no idea what that was. I was an engineer, but I didn't know what telecom was or other than the phone, like most of us, you picked up. Back then, the folks, they were on the walls in your house and they had cords on them. They weren't cell phones back then, right? And probably nobody knows what a landline is, but you picked them up, you pressed buttons and you dialed somebody. Mm-hmm. They rang on your desk. And if you weren't at your desk, you got a message. So there actually were much more sophisticated than that. And I learned about that. And I thought, this stuff's pretty cool. I think, I want to paint the yellow line down the information highway. And so I got a job selling telecommunications equipment. After that, I was hired to be the sales manager after I proved that I could sell. And I did that. And, a couple of years went by with that company, and I moved to a bigger company where I ended up being VP of operations, and had good successes there. So fast forward 10 years since I got out of the Navy, and now I learned about telecom. I knew how to sell it. I knew how to install it in the operations side. And I thought, why am I working for somebody else when I could be working for myself, doing the same thing and reaping more of the rewards? So I started my second business, a company called Delta V Communication, and we sold business telephone systems. And so I bootstrapped that and grew that till 2009. As you recall, in late 2007, 2008, we started hitting a big recession. They call it the Great Recession here in the States. Yeah. I was able to keep things going for a little while, but by summer of 2009, I knew the end was in sight. So I sold that business and, went on to other things.
Yeah. Well, in terms of, going through those two businesses you just mentioned, what was your, what you say was one of the, the greatest lessons learned from having those two businesses?
There's two lessons learned, I think. So one on the revenue side, we were transactional, both those businesses, right? So the first one, National Wedding Registry, we got off the ground, but we never hit any critical mass in sales. So it's hard to say on that one, but it was still transactional because, a couple would register with us, and once the wedding was over, they had no need for us unless they got divorced, and, but obviously we didn't live long enough for that to happen. But the telecom business, people bought equipment, it's technology, and it's not like computers nowadays where you're buying new software every couple of years, you're buying new hardware every couple of years as it goes faster and faster and faster. A telephone system worked, and if it wasn't the latest and greatest, it still worked for 10 or 15 or 20 years. So you sold it once or bought it once, and that was that. So it was very transactional. And the reason I had to sell my business during the recession was I didn't have any revenue because people stopped buying technology. What they had was working. There was no reason to upgrade it. And I just couldn't survive. I had no revenue. It was drying up. And I was fortunate that I was able to sell it and put a few dollars in my pocket because we had a good customer base, but I wasn't in a position to capitalize on that customer base. So lesson number one is nothing beats residual revenue. Nothing. So that's my first lesson. The second lesson came by accident. When I got hired as a sales manager, and I got to the point where at my first job, I was ready to hire salespeople, we had no training system in place. The owner told me when he hired me, he said, I can't train you. You're going to have to teach yourself how to do this. And I did, but I didn't want anybody else to have to go through that. So I created a training manual because I knew that from the military. So it broke down what I did into sort of constituent parts. And when I hired salespeople, I would put them through this training, and it was good and it was successful. We set company records in sales until I left. Went to the new company and I got hired as VP of operations. I did the same thing. We had no ops manual. We had no standard SOP, nothing written at any rate. It was all word of mouth. And so people sort of did things their own way. And so I thought, well, this is no good because people are getting a different experience depending on who answered the phone. And we want a standard experience because then we can work and improve things because we know when things don't work, we could change the process and make them work better, and we can continuously improve. But when everyone does their own thing, there's no way to do that. So again, I wrote a manual. I wrote what I call a TOPS manual, Training Operation Procedure Standardization Manual, and we started training on that stuff. And lo and behold, everybody started flourishing. It worked. So that really stuck with me. And if you standardize and write out your procedures and train to those procedures, that's how you build a business successfully, because you don't avoid the stumbling blocks, but you avoid them a second time, right? You only make the same mistake once, maybe twice, but never a third time.
Yeah, you always learn from your failures or your mistakes anyway. So,
but only if you document them. Otherwise, 5 years go by and you make the same mistake all over again because you forgot the lesson.
What do you think that your manual that you created, back then, would it still be valid to now? If you had to use that again?
Parts of it would be. One of the mistakes I made in my first net manuals I wrote is I would incorporate the real specifics. In other words, if we're using a piece of software in that manual, I would have, here's how to do it in the software. Well, if we upgraded the software, changed it out, let's say a CRM or a service software or something like that, we'd have to rewrite the entire manual. So today, as I work with clients, what I advise them to do is you write a manual that is, here's how the information flows, and then have separate manuals, which is how you do it with whatever tools you have today. So you're only updating one piece of it, not necessarily both. But I will tell you this, when I sold my second business, I sold it to the same company that bought the company that I left to start my business, if that makes sense, right? So I left the second company I worked for. They had already bought them. And when I was talking to the owner of the who bought the company, and we're talking about what he bought and why and how much he paid for it, which was a lot more than I thought that company was worth. One of the reasons he bought it was because they had an operations manual.
Oh,
right? Because it was standard procedures. And so he knew he could replicate their success because everything was memorialized.
nice.
So there's a real value in standardization.
Nice. Great. So, I know you're great on leadership, and you're the author of Locked on Leadership, in terms of, when you start in a business, or you have this great idea, or you want to be you as an entrepreneur as well, what role does leadership play in all this? Because you want to get it right, even though you don't get it right the first time, but you ultimately want to get some processes, and some standard right as well, strategies as well, what part does leadership come in all this equation?
Well, if you're going to have people working for you at all, you need to have a leadership strategy. The mistake that I see most companies, people make, and companies are people, right? Let's start there, right? They're not their own entity. I mean, legally they might be, but they're made up of people and people run them. And the problem people think is they'll come up with a business strategy, which is, how do I grow my market share? How do I grow my company? But they don't have a leadership strategy, which is how I grow my people. And you're not going to do the first without the second, because you can't do it all on your own. So if you don't grow people, and by grow, I mean grow them as people, their abilities, and make them come out and flourish and really step into their own power. And if you don't help people do that, then at some point, you're not going to be able to continue to grow your business, because you can only manage, it's the E-Myth story. You can only manage so much. And that's where people start going, you know what? I used to be bigger and it was too hard. I spent way too many hours. I'm running out of hours a day. So I've downsized and I'm much happier. And that's because they don't know how to grow people, and they try and do it all themselves. So leadership is absolutely essential if you don't want to have to micromanage every aspect of your business.
Great. But another thing again that I see that, business owners face, entrepreneurs as well face is the issue of, trying to create this brand, because there's always this conflict, there's always this disconnect between the business branding and the personal branding. For you that have, had your businesses, and you stay on that part as well, what would you say comes first, business branding or personal branding?
So first of all, I want to address something you just said, which is there's always a disconnect. There should never be a disconnect for a small business or for a closely held business. By that, I mean, not a publicly traded company. That's a different conversation, right? Because a closely held business, one that's privately owned, if you're the owner, you are the brand. The problem is, if you have a disconnect between your personal brand and your business brand, what you really have is an integrity issue. And so people will see you one way, and they'll see you display the company as another. And at some place in their mind, they're going to go, this doesn't feel right? Because what I see is not the same thing as what you're saying you are, right? That's where that disconnect comes out. And so now we've seeded some distrust, and it doesn't mean you can't overcome that, but you're never going to be able to really truly create raving fans with that kind of disconnect. So your personal brand, to answer your question, has to come first, and your business brand must be authentic to your personal brand. What you see is what you get. And if it's not that way, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, nice one, good one. So, but Locked on Leadership, your podcast, would you say you started that based on you want to create that brand for yourself? Is that a personal brand effect for you?
So my Locked on Leadership is actually not the name of my podcast. That's my business name, and that's my leadership name. And I started, I did a lot of work. The first thing I did was figure out who I am and what's my authentic brand. Now, Locked On Leadership became the name because of my background, right? So locked on is the term we used in the F-14 for when your radar was focused on a target and you were going to prosecute that target, right, until it was no longer a problem. And so I wanted people to be focused on leadership. And so we're Locked On Leadership. And that's where the name came from. And it speaks to who I am, right? It was, even though it was only 7 years of my life, those were very informative and powerful 7 years. My podcast is called Disarming Persuasion.
Yeah.
Now, I have a co-host, Darren Cecil, and so I take persuasion from a leadership perspective, and Darren takes it from a sales perspective. He's a sales trainer extraordinaire. He's a friend of mine. I've known him for 12 years. He was one of my instructors in sales many, many years ago. I consider him my PhD level instructor in sales, and we became friends. And the name is, frankly, it's a play on words. Darren is missing his left arm below the elbow. And so obviously disarming is a military term. So Disarming Persuasion is where the name comes from. And so it's authentic to both of our brands. And Darren very much is his own brand as well. And it was just a really good fit. And so it's a fun podcast. We give advice on how to connect with people, how to persuade people without manipulating, right? To be authentic to ourselves, we have to be taken care of, make sure we're helping people achieve their means and goals, but people distrust strangers. So how do we connect to people so that we can persuade them in such a way that they'll be open? And as long as you have their best interest in heart, it's not manipulation. And so that's our podcast. In addition, we love to have guests on that have been either in sales or leadership positions to tell their success stories as well as their struggles. And the other thing we love to do on the podcast is have people who are currently challenged with something, and we'll work them through their challenge and see how we can help them, on the podcast itself. So if any of your listeners are having struggles like that, have them reach out and contact us, and we'd love to have them on.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. But someone's listening to this, and the person is in sales, because you just mentioned something about, trying to work your way and how to get people to how to get people to buy into your products, or you create that environment for you to be able to sell to them. Someone's listening to this, and the person is wondering, okay, I'm a sales guy, what is the first thing to do, in terms of getting into sales, because I know you've done sales before previously,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, getting into sales, like you have a product, nobody knows, and you want to introduce this product, what do you think is the first thing you do, in terms of, you trying to reach out and let people to buy into that product?
So if we're talking about a product that doesn't currently exist on the market, that is solving a problem that people don't realize exists, you're trying to actually blaze a new path, or are you talking about a person who's trying to sell something that already is being sold by other people?
Well, okay, let's have the two answers, right? Okay, something that hasn't been sold before and something that has been sold before.
So the first thing, if you're trying to sell something that has never been sold before, is we need to make sure that people want it, right? Because just because we see it as a problem doesn't mean other people see it as a problem, right? So we have to, in sales in general, and this goes across the board, we have to think in terms of what the other person needs. It's not about me, I need to make a sale. It's about, do they need the product? The value proposition in any product and any sales is as follows, and this is really important to understand. People will buy something from you, whether it's a service or a physical product itself, if the cost of that product or service is less than the value they place on it, right? Because it's going to help them do something. So for example, I want to get my exterior of my house painted. Now I can paint. So if somebody came in and said to me, it's going to cost $1 million to paint the exterior of your house. And folks, I don't live in a big mansion. I'm in a small 2,000 square foot house, right? It's not worth it to me to spend $1 million. I can paint.
Yep.
On the other hand, if somebody said, I'll paint your house for $500, oh my God, in a nanosecond, right? I'm going to do that because my time, energy, and effort, and I'm not as good a painter as a pro, although I probably wouldn't trust a $500 paint job either. But assuming it was a pro or I knew their work was good, sure, right? So where's that value proposition? That's one. People are only going to buy something if it's worth more to them than they're spending on it. The flip side is for those of us, right, on the selling side. We only sell products where the value we receive for it is more than the value of what we give. So I'm selling a product that costs me, and this is fairly typical in business, say $100 to make. I'd be happy to sell that for $200, right? Double my investment, but I may not be happy to sell it for $110, right? Even though it's a little bit more. So there has to be that disparity in what it costs me and the value to me versus the value I receive. Same with services, right? So I'm not going to work for an effective rate of $20 an hour. My time is worth more money than that. My knowledge, my history, my background, my experiences, significantly more than that, right? But if somebody's willing to pay me for an hour session, $100,000, yeah, my value, to me, my knowledge is valuable, and 100,000, sure, I would take that, right? So, because it's probably more than what I truly internally value my knowledge for. Yeah. So if you're trying to sell a new product that's never been out there before, you have to understand, what do people do? Is it solving a problem that people want solved, and what value do they put on that problem? And then can you sell it at the price that people are willing to pay for it and have it be valuable to you? So that's question number one. It's more the economics. And then as a salesperson, your first job, irrespective of whether it's a new product or an old product, is to connect with people. Number one, make a personal connection. Here in the States, in the Western culture, probably in general, we grow up, for the most part, our culture says, beware of strangers, right? And anthropologically speaking, right, that's just safe, right? If you go back 200,000 years, somebody new was dangerous because you didn't know. They were the unknown. The unknown is always dangerous. We also don't like talking about money. We don't have conversations about how much do you make? How much is this worth? Oh, you just got a really nice purse. How much did you spend on that, right? We don't do that. We don't ask about how much things cost unless we have a very, very close connection with somebody, right?
Yep.
A salesperson is a stranger looking for your money. So there's a problem there. So you need to make a connection so they're no longer a stranger. So you and that person feel connected. Then that money conversation becomes that much more comfortable. You also, as a salesperson, need to make sure you understand why they want the sale, what's driving that sale. And that's an emotional thing, right? And people make purchases to avoid pain or seek pleasure. The most powerful of those two, and the most common, is avoidance of pain. It's much more powerful than pleasure seeking. And I'm not going to share with a stranger my pain, my dark, deep emotions. We just don't do that. We share that with close confidence that we trust. So if we don't make that connection, we don't get that trust, we're not going to learn what the real pain is, and we're not going to be as successful in making that sale because now we're a stranger asking about money.
In other words, you have to build relationships, right?
That's exactly it. You just said what it took me 5 minutes to say in 2 words: build relationships. You're a man of few words.
No, but it's good. It's good the way you said it, because it's kind of like a journey, because it's kind of like taking us through a journey, and on that journey you're learning things as well. There are different variables to that as well. Which is totally great. Nice. So for you now, you're locked on leadership. Your podcast is going. What is the next thing for you?
Well, I also started a new experience. It's called Command College, and it's for business leaders who are looking to transform their teams into self-directed high performers. If you've ever been in a position where you just, you have to call in all the time on a vacation to make sure things are getting done, where you're constantly looking over people's shoulders, so you don't have the time to build your business, to strategize, to deal with the big picture stuff because you're too busy making sure the things you've already promised your customers get taken care of. Mm-hmm. This is the program for you. If you're looking to get more time and get more out of your people, it's a 3-day intensive where we take leadership from soup to nuts, and you come out of it knowing what you need to do to transform your own team.
Nice, man. It's good, man. I loved your journey so far. It's been great because looking at how you started, your business as well. Because, when we want to start a business or want to go into a business, from the few guys that have come on the show, their stories are similar to yours as well. There's always this connection between your past job or career to your present business. Looking at you now, your story, there's a connection between your military days and your business. For you, do you think that that is a sure way to go? Because people will say, oh, even if you're a military guy, why don't you just start something that doesn't have to do with military, something different? Would you say it's good to just go into something that you don't know at all, something new, totally new to you?
I think as long as you're authentic to yourself, it doesn't matter whether it's new or old. Like, right, I'm not in the military. In other words, I didn't start a contracting company, or I'm not doing aviation or right. Those are things that are directly out of the military. But what I have done, and what we have no choice but to do as human beings, is taking the lessons I've learned from the experiences I've had, not just from the military, right, but from running half a dozen different companies in different industries, and synthesizing that into where I am today. And so, you look back and you say locked on leadership and it's military, and it is. It's a very disciplined approach, which is also militaristic, but that's also authentic to me. Since I was 13, I've participated in martial arts and being disciplined. So, that's who I am. That's who I am today. And let me actually modify that, right? Because in 1986, before I joined the Navy, I don't think I would have called myself, in fact, I know I wouldn't have called myself disciplined, even though I had been training in martial arts for some time, right? I was kind of, when I say wishy-washy, I just took where the wind blew me. I didn't have any direction. I didn't have any focus. I didn't have any goal. I was starting to develop it back then, but I didn't have it. And so if I had started a business then, like I have today, it would look completely different because I was a different person. So you have to be authentic to who you are. And that means it's connected to your past.
Nice. Great. I see some of that as well, because using myself as an example, starting this podcast, is all based on how I got into employment, my journey into my career path where I am right now. That stirred up this whole podcasting for me, because it was like a case of, okay, people always saying, oh, you got a remarkable story, your career path is so inspiring for others, why don't you tell your story? I said, okay, well, if I can tell my story, that means I can tell other people's stories as well, so that brought that connection, my career path, and starting this podcast. So which is, you're right, you're surely right anyway, because there's, for me, I think there should be a connection, from your past to the present. Once you're comfortable with it, there should definitely be a connection to that. But in terms of
Absolutely.
lessons, yeah, carry on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, notice also though, you're not telling my story because you can't.
Yeah,
that would be like me telling Tony Hawk's story or Shaun White's story, or trying to think of a famous British football player just to bring it up to your audience. Beckham's story, right? Beckham's story.
David Beckham.
Beckham, right? I can't tell their stories. I'm not them. I could tell a third person, but who wants to hear that? Right? You want to hear Beckham's story from David Beckham himself, right? So you're providing a forum where other business people like me.
Yes. That's the point I'm trying to make. Like, telling other people's story means that, I'm providing this platform for people to come tell their story. So in a way, I'm the facilitator,
Right. And so for our business folks out there, you also have a story. And whether you decide to go into podcasting for marketing or just run your business, but tell your story through your marketing, and then complete your story through the way your operations works, your sales works, so your company is an integral whole that embodies your story and is true to you. And if you do that, I promise you, you will be successful beyond your wildest dreams.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice, man. Nice. But it's a lot of people that want to go into sales or into business as well. They often have this thing of, oh, can I really do it? There's this self-doubt. There's this self-doubt because you like, I always use myself as an example, starting this podcast, because my weakness was, I stutter, I was kind of like a shy guy, I don't talk much, like you said, I'm a man of few words. So there was this thing of, oh, how am I going to communicate? How am I going to, put my points across? How am I going to do this? So there was a period of that, procrastination as well. There was that period as well. But I think for me, it's all about just starting. It's all about just starting, because I know a lot of people will say, well, I'm not great at it. I can't do this. But like babies, baby steps, like a baby learning how to walk, the baby's going to fall down anyway. I think when we had the intro call, we spoke about, if you want to build your muscles, you have to train your muscles anyway. If you leave your muscles, they're not going to get trained anyway. So, so for me, it's all about taking the first step, and the interesting thing about it is that, once you take that first step, every other thing will just come along.
No, you're absolutely right. Just do it. There's obviously a company that has that as their motto.
Yeah.
Right. If you never start, you're never going to do it, and you'll get better with time. Bobby Flay, I'm sure probably many of your listeners know who he is. He's a famous cook. He has a show here in the States, Beat Bobby Flay. He's a celebrity chef. And years ago, so one of the shows that he has now that he does is, what is it? America's Next Food Network Star, right? Where they have a competition of really good chefs, not always chefs, but people who can cook at least, who also want to make it in TV as a Food Network star. And he's critiquing them and criticizing, giving them guidance, and it's a competition until eventually there's only one and they get a show. And I'm listening to the advice that Bobby's giving them about their presence and their camera presence. And I flash back in my mind, my wife and I always joke about this, is years ago, Bobby had a show called Chillin' and Grillin', where he was a co-host and they were doing grilling stuff. And he was terrible. I mean, I remember watching that show and he had like no personality whatsoever. I'm like, why are people watching this show? And he's full of personality now. And Bobby, if you're hearing this podcast, this is homage to where you've come. Right. So if you're starting out, everybody starts out that way, but if you don't do it, you'll never get better at it.
I think people are scared of failure.
Yeah, I think that's probably absolutely true. I know I'm afraid of failure. I hate failure. Okay. But you know what? Reframe it. So I don't fail. I just learn a way not to do something. Okay. That's, I think it was, Thomas Edison said, I didn't fail 1,000 times in making a light bulb. I learned 1,000 ways not to do it. Right. So how do you reframe? It's just a reframe. It's not failure. It's throwing out a methodology, and chances are there's successes in there as well. Right. It's never 100% failure. And sports psychologists will tell you, don't focus on what went wrong, focus on what went right. And that will start to expand. Success builds success. So the more success you have, the more you will have. But it has to start.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. Another one again is people are also scared about what others will say. What would they say? What would they say? What will my friends say? What will my family say? There's I think there's always that as well.
Yeah, and I think we have that fear until we know who we are. And we're talking about my journey. I can tell you uncategorically that 20 years ago, I truly didn't know who I was. I had an inkling. There were certain things that were important to me, but I didn't realize how important they were. And so I would not necessarily act with integrity. And by integrity, what I mean is being true to yourself. That's my definition of integrity, acting as an integral whole, walking the talk, right? So what you present to the world is actually who you are. And until I got to figure out who I was, my success was limited. And it was once I became true to myself and knew who I was. And then all of a sudden, what other people think doesn't matter, because I'm the best Dave Rosenberg out there. David Scott Rosenberg, born in Philadelphia in June of 1961. There are other David Rosenbergs out there, and they are the best David Rosenbergs that they can be, right? But they're not me. And so when you know who you are, you don't worry about what other people think, because you are the best you there is.
Yeah, absolutely. But in the course of your journey so far, business journey, life journey, career journey, what would you say is one of the best, advice, you've gotten so far?
Well, probably the advice I just gave, because this is not me reflecting necessarily on my experience. It was advice I received that I had to sit and chew on for a while and figure out what that really meant. And that's the challenge. But be yourself. Truly be your authentic self, and care about others. I guess that those two pieces together. Right? Figure out how to care about others, and not in a dysfunctional way. And that's the challenge, right? Because we think about give to others, and people give themselves away till there's nothing left. And you have to protect yourself at the same time, right? Because if you give yourself 100% away where there's nothing left of you, and your health goes, and your mental processes go, right? Because you're tired and exhausted, and you've just give, and you've never taken time for yourself. Well, then you reach a point where you can't give to others anymore, right? So just like a company has to be profitable, we have to take care of ourselves. But you don't want to wall yourself off from others, where all you do is are selfish and take care of yourself because nobody else is going to. And we all know that person, right? So find that balance where you know what you can give and still be healthy, and know your boundaries so you can be healthy. So be yourself, give to others, do those two things, and you will be more successful than you ever dream about.
Nice one, man. I like that, someone comes to meet you and say, he or she comes to meet you and say, Dave, I've looked on you, doing an amazing job. I like your story as well. Johnny, it's been amazing, and I want to get into business as well. You as a business owner and someone that has, had businesses and you've also sold those businesses as well. You've left businesses, you have a new one now, what would be that great advice you want to give this person in terms of starting from the scratch, business from the scratch?
Well, I mean, the first piece of advice, as I've already mentioned, would make sure whatever you're selling, people want. Number one, need and want, not just need. A lot of business owners start something that they think people need, and maybe people really do need it, but they don't want it. And if they don't want it, you can't sell it. Right. Number two, don't worry about growth. Not right off the bat. Growth is the last thing you want to worry about, right? So there's an order to things. Number one, take care of cash flow. Learn to manage your cash, right? And there's a balancing act between being stingy and not spending anything, right? And doing things on the cheap, and being, just spending and buying and burning through your cash, right? You need to figure out a good balancing act so that your cash will last, and control your cash. The second thing, once you control your cash, is worry about being profitable, because that supports cash flow. If you're not profitable, your cash will disappear, no matter how good you are at cash management. So cash management, profitability, then efficiency. The number one reason businesses fail is they grow too fast, and now their inefficiencies become hyper exposed, and they end up losing money. So now think of yourself as like a chrysalis, a cocoon, where you're becoming more and more efficient till you're as efficient as you can be. And once you're as efficient as you can be at your current size, because it's a constant cycle, then you focus on growth, boom, grow revenues, and you'll grow quickly, profitably, right, and efficiently to a certain size. And then the process starts again. You're going to need new cash flow systems. You're going to need to make sure you're profitable for the next size. Then you need to put the efficiencies in place, and then bam, expansion again. And you'll keep going through that cycle. Don't be in a hurry.
Yeah, nice one, Dave, man. Like that, It's been an amazing show, love every bit of it. I've taken, loads of takeaway from me as well. It's great, Dave, if you guys want to get in touch with you, where's the best place for them to get in touch with you?
Probably the best place is on my website, which is lockedonleadership.com. Let me spell that. I'm sure it's going to be in the show notes, but just, I know my accent is sometimes hard to understand. It's LOCKEDON leadership.com. And there you'll find information on my command college. If you're looking for a speaker for an event, whether it's in person or virtual, I'm happy to do that. If you just think you need any help at all, I promise I'll answer your emails or phone calls or text messages. If I see the smoke signal, I'll even try and answer that.
Nice one, Dave, man. It's been nice having you on this show, man, and I appreciate your time as well. You reaching out, connecting. It's great, I have a new friend in the States now, loving it, and Dave, and I'm grateful for the time as well, because I know now, everybody's busy trying to, get stuff done, but you still have the time to come on the show, which is great, and I'm really grateful for that.
Well, I appreciate you having me. It has been great getting to know you. I promise you, when I make it to the British Isles, because it is on my bucket list, I've never been there. I keep telling my wife, she's
even your days of military, you never been here.
No, I've been to the Far East and the Middle East, but I was a West Coast sailor, so we didn't make it to Europe and over there. So no, it's on my list. I've both the Europe as well as, but more importantly, the British Isles. I want to see Ireland, Scotland, England. I just, for whatever reason, it's just something I think is be really cool for me. So I'll check, definitely let you know when I'm out there. Likewise, if you're in San Diego or Southern California, it's not that big an area. I'd love to connect.
Yeah, nice one, Dave, man. Nice one. Thanks a lot, buddy. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.